Um, Good morning to those of you on the Pacific, and good afternoon to you if you're on the East Coast of the US or Canada, and good evening if you're in Europe, and good middle of the night to you if you're in Asia or Australia. Um, and hello. And I guess if you couldn't hear me, Christian, you would have said something like, I can't hear you, instead of saying hi. So I'm guessing that everything's working. And also, yeah, I'm just going to start then. I'm going to talk. I'm using a new platform for me called StreamYard, which hopefully works, but maybe you can tell me if it seems to be working. We are currently broadcasting on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, LinkedIn, and VK. So if you're on any of those platforms, then hello, and feel free to share whatever you're looking at so other people might know that it's happening, although it'll all be watchable later. But the idea here with these things is that they are interactive, in that I can see all your comments, which so far are only coming through YouTube. I don't know if there are anybody commenting on other platforms, but at the moment I'm only seeing the YouTube comments, which makes me, if you're watching on a platform other than YouTube, please say something, and then just any kind of comment, so I can see if we are also seeing those comments. Let's see. There's something we can view this on Restream and see if maybe I can see the comments. This is a live broadcast. We are very much live, and part of the live phenomenon is that it's just live. You don't know what's going on until, because it's live. Chat is waiting for new messages. Okay, so I guess good. VK is coming through. Facebook coming through, at least on Restream. Let's see if I can see that also on StreamYard. Excellent. Oh, fantastic. Great. We're all happening. Excellent. I love it when things work, which they so often don't, but that's part of just everything in the world. Even Okinawa. What is it, 3 a.m. over there? Good. So wonderful to see you all out there in various countries on various platforms. And so I'm actually going to be doing this Monday, this 10 a.m. Pacific broadcast, 6 p.m. GMT broadcast, on more than just weekly. It's every Monday, but it's going to be soon, starting like very soon this week. It'll be other days. Like I'll be talking with Rob Johnson on Thursday, and with Margot Black on Saturday, and I'm waiting to hear from a couple other folks. And it's not that I have like loads of extra free time, oddly enough, but I just want to do this because I know there's so many quarantined people out there, and we need to be discussing a lot of things. And so you can look out for that coming up on all these platforms. Generally, the time will be 10 a.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. GMT, 1 p.m. in New York, and hey, South Africa, and whatever time in South Africa, I have no idea, but I think it's pretty good time in South Africa, right? In Africa, it's like, let's see, it's like sometime in the evening anyway, not too late in the evening right now, I think, throughout Africa. And yeah, so it's you can never find a good time for the whole world, but you can find a good time for much of the world, if you're sneaky about it, unless people are working 9-to-5 jobs. But one of the unusual circumstances at the moment is that many people are not doing that. Of course, many people aren't anyway, but many more people are not doing that either. So yeah, so in other episodes, I will be actually, interviewing other people, so it won't just be a monologue. And I'm set up to start doing that, and will be doing that very soon. Rob Johnson on Thursday is one of my favorite songwriters on the planet, and Margot Black on Saturday is one of my favorite political activists running for city council here in Portland, Oregon. Founder of the Portland Tenants United organization, which is more relevant now than ever. And hello to all the rent strikers out there. I hope you're continuing to not pay the rent. And if you are in one of the states that has not suspended evictions, or some country where they have not suspended evictions, I'm sorry that you're in that situation, but I hope it can go better if we all stick together in solidarity. Then anything is possible. However, I wanted to focus today in this session. I think it's nice to be picking topics generally, and there seemed to be a fair bit of interest on the subject of songwriting, and so I thought I'd focus on that. And I think generally on the Monday broadcasts, I will continue to do just a thing sort of by myself and talk about some area of expertise. And on the other broadcasts on other days of the week, I'll be interviewing other people on random other days of the week at 10 a.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. GMT. But today, songwriting. And I think next week I'll talk about, there's been a lot of interest expressed in the idea of what to do as a musician online these days, and how to make a living as an artist during the pandemic or not, But that is what I figured I'd talk about next week. And I'm very interested in anybody's questions or comments on any of these subjects, and also on any other subject you might want me to talk about, or interview somebody about, or whatever. However, now on to the subject at hand, which is songwriting, or pandemic songwriting in particular. Exactly what that is, we can just define that as we go. But I mean, first, just sort of backing up in terms of the concept of like songwriting and just art generally, and artists generally. I mean, we hear these things getting tossed around a lot, and a lot of people talking about how, along with so many other people who are now out of work, the artists, the touring musicians are out of work, and this is very true, and our lives were fairly marginal oftentimes beforehand, et cetera, et cetera. And so, yeah, lots of that is being talked about. But I think that's not what I'm going to talk about today. What I want to focus on is actually the work of artists, this creative thing, the creatives, whatever, I hate that word, but what it means, what we're talking about when we're talking about being an artist, or creating, or making art, or making music, or whatever kind of art we're making. Okay. And first of all, just as a, if we're starting out, sort of backing up here, and then moving a little into the details here, anybody can do this. This is a universal thing. We are all born with rhythm. We are all born with melody. Our hearts are beating. Our voices are capable of notes and hitting notes. That's true from birth. Okay, so we're all rhythmic and melodic creatures, whatever culture we're from. This is a universal human phenomenon, and and we're all capable of communicating eloquently in a language, and maybe even in multiple languages, but all of us are capable of doing that. And and it doesn't matter whether you're one of the ones who speaks multiple languages, or one of the boring ones like me who doesn't. But look, anybody can communicate, and this is not a mysterious thing. This is a thing that anybody can learn to do, just like you can learn how to make a really cool looking realistic city out of Legos, or you can learn how to cook Vietnamese food like a real Vietnamese person, or you can learn how to fix your leaking sink, and you can learn how to program in a programming language. You can understand the basic principles of calculus. We're all capable of these things. It's not a specialty thing. You don't have to go to school to learn how to do any of these things. Um, and um, Songwriting is very much one of those things, and I think it's an important thing to mention because they try to tell us in the music industry for the past century or so that that music and artists and creative people have some kind of special skill, and they're not they're special mysterious people that we should sort of worship or whatever, and they deserve to be rich, of course, and whatever. I mean, whatever kind of images you have, it's this thing that we can that they're special people somehow. And that we can't all be like that. And of course, there's reasons why any industry would want to talk about the members of their industry in that way, but it's not true. And we're all capable of this. Not that it doesn't require a lot of work. It does. To get good at anything requires a lot of work, but it's nothing that you need to go to school to learn how to do. And it's nothing mysterious. And it's something that we all actually not only can do, but I think for many people who are wondering, what should we do? It's relevant to mention that writing songs and other forms of artistic or non-artistic, whatever that might mean, but that doesn't really exist. Any kind of artistic communication form of any kind is worth engaging in for a whole lot of different reasons. I mean, one reason is that it's very therapeutic if you're spending all your time alone or whatever, not alone, whatever your situation is, escaping into your mind and writing a song, even if it's about ongoing, very non-escapist political realities or whatever you might be writing about. It's a very therapeutic, even cathartic activity that will help keep you sane and emotionally centered and feeling productive. It's very, very good for you to play music. It's very good for your mental health to play music and to write. But and to reflect and to just sit there blankly and think and to be bored. You have to let yourself be bored. In order to do anything brilliant, you have to first be bored. But I mean, crises are also helpful, but the combination of a crisis and boredom, which is oddly enough a very common combination during this crisis, it's a brilliant combination for creative output. But also another reason to engage in such creative output is that it's never more important than now to communicate with people about very important, ongoing, pressing issues. Okay, I mean, like for example, 1 out of 4 renters in the United States were unable to pay their rent at the beginning of this month, and the concept of who owns this world and who should and whether housing is a human right or a privilege, and whether water is a human right or a privilege, running water, and whether eating is a human right or a privilege. These things are more relevant now than they have been since the Great Depression. Just statistically, it's obvious because the whole society's shut down at the moment. So it's very relevant to communicate about these concepts. And these concepts, if you communicate about them well, you can actually have a lot of impact on the discussion and on people's minds. And you can create memes and viral memes, and you can really influence a lot of people, even with relatively small platforms, especially if a lot of different people are doing it. It can become a thing. And any social movement produces lots of music and lots of creative output naturally. And we are going to be having a lot of social movements coming out of this crisis for sure. These crises, these multiple crises. But it's going to be music that's going to be challenging the sort of orientation that many people have had right up until like last month, because everything is different and the whole parameters of the conversation are now different, and we need musicians and artists to communicate that. That's very important, not just other people. But I'm just like, there's a question here, and Eric Phillips asks on Facebook, you've written so many songs, do you worry much about repeating yourself, or is the message more important, and that's enough to keep it fresh? And Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm very happy to just go off of my little train of thought here and just answer questions. Actually, I prefer that. My train of thought, just keeps on going with or without questions. Sometimes I can keep that up for better or for worse, but I like interactivity much more. So that's a wonderful question, and please keep those questions coming. It's a very relevant question, as are going to be any of the questions that anybody asks. If you're thinking it, somebody else is thinking it too. Yeah, the question of but I'll just try to I'm trying but I'll try to finish thoughts before answering questions, which is something I've learned is a very good practice when doing live streamed monologues. But I kind of did just finish that point there. So songwriting is something we can all do and we all should do. Okay, that's the main point there. I finished that point. Now moving on to the question of how to do it well. It's something that you need to practice and do a lot, and you need feedback. And you can get that in many forms. And one of the best forms of getting feedback is just, well, not very practical at the moment, but if you're playing in front of a live audience and you do a sad song, people should cry by the end of it. And obviously that's harder to figure out on the internet if your sad song is making people cry. So, but that's a good judge of your whether your songwriting is good. If people are responding the way you think they should, if it's funny, they should laugh. But I want to specifically on the question of repetition. It's a really important question because it gets to the point of what are we of content and style. Okay, and basically there is a tendency among sort of politically oriented songwriters, and I think this tendency probably goes back a long way, but there's a tendency to think that just because you have something important to say or something relevant to say, that you that it doesn't matter how well you say it, and this is a very importantly wrong concept. The style, how you say it, is just as important as what you're saying. And the thing about good songwriting and other forms of creative of creativity, whether it's a novel or a nonfiction book or a poem. Okay, but if I say songwriting, I'm talking about all that stuff too, generally. Okay, but just for the for brevity's sake, I'll talk about songwriting and music when I really mean other things too, in addition, oftentimes. But anyway, a good song with a good song, you're casting a spell. You're a magician and you're casting a spell. And every time I touch my face, I'm so conscious of it, but I do it all the time, just like Trump. Okay, so oh, and David Heap, lovely to see you there, but I will not be singing. Probably, I don't have any plans to sing on this one. But my 11 pandemic songs that I wrote about the pandemic, I just put up on a podcast, and you can find it on my website or on, if you search for This Week with David Rovics on any podcasting platform, or SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, go to my website, davidrovics.com, and you can hear the podcast I put together yesterday, which is a sort of review of the pandemic with the 11 songs that I've written about it so far. And it'll sound better than it would sound if I live streamed it now, because they're recorded. It's one of the problems with live streaming, but yeah, look for This Week with David Rovics, or Song for Today is the other podcast I've got, and you can hear all the songs I've written about the past several weeks. And I'll do other live streamed concerts on here as well, but not today. And so anyway, the style versus content thing, the repetition question, the question about whether the message is more important than keeping it fresh. Of course, people's ideas about what is repetitive and what isn't repetitive is going to be vary a lot. So some people who are not into a particular style of music, when they hear that style of music, whatever it might be, whether it's bluegrass or punk rock or classical, they might think, oh, that all sounds the same. It's very repetitive, and people will think the same thing of a uh, person, a type of person, and a look, a nationality, an ethnicity that people are unfamiliar with. If you've never been to, if you've never traveled to countries where they speak other languages, then all those other languages can tend to sound the same. If you haven't spent much time in Eastern Europe, you might not be able to differentiate the sounds of a Latin language like Romanian from the sounds like of a Slavic language like Russian. I mean, uh, which sounds ridiculous to anybody from Eastern Europe. Of course, Romanian and Russian sound completely different from each other, but if you're not from there, they sound similar. So there is this problem, with anything. So there will always be people who say, "Oh, David Rovig's songs all sound the same," and that's because I'm playing an acoustic guitar on everything, and acoustic guitars always sound the same. If you're some people, so you'll never be able to please them all. Um, but how you say it and keeping the music fresh and all that is extremely important with every song that you write. And this is not to say that you can succeed every time in doing that, and certainly it's not to say that I succeed every time in doing it. But no, you really should avoid just doing the same melody you did last time. Which is hard if you've written a lot of songs and you start it gets harder to come up with fresh ideas. And actually, even if you haven't written a lot of songs, it still is really hard. If you listen to pop music, you'll hear, as do a lot, because I have children, including a teenager. So I've gotten a whole new education in modern pop music, as most any parent of a teenager can attest will happen. And you notice that this chord progression, which if you were in the key of G, it would be G, D, E minor, C. This what is it, 1 5 4 6 chord progression. It's a gorgeous chord progression. I've used it on many occasions. But every week there's a new pop song, a new really popular pop song that uses the same chord progression. Every week you'll hear a new advertisement on YouTube or TV using exactly that same chord progression. It's a very popular chord progression, and it has been for a very long time. And you'll notice lots of songs using it. But each time they use it for a new pop hit, you'll notice that they do something to differentiate it from the last time they used that chord progression for a pop hit. And it might have been the same producer who did it, but they'll come up with a new sound for the keyboard that sounds a little fresh. It has to be something fresh. It can't sound like the same last pop hit. Each one of those new pop hits sounds a bit different from the last one in important ways, and there's important reasons why each one of them became a hit, and it has to do with the production and the songwriting and the performance, but oftentimes the production. But it's the same with any kind of songwriting or art that you're making. It has to be fresh, and there has to be you're casting a spell, and the spell has to work, and the components of the spell are the content and the style, but what you're saying and how you're saying it and the music and whether it speaks to people or sounds just repetitive or like something they just heard on the radio or something that was a hit in 1965. It has to be different, and there's a lot of ways to uh, to experiment in all kinds of ways that you might call tricks that are to trick yourself into coming up with more inventive musical ideas. And one of those little tricks is experiment with a tuning other than standard tuning. Experiment with an instrument other than the guitar. Experiment with playing in a tuning other than standard tuning, and then put the capo on the seventh fret, and then see what kinds of melodies you come up with. Those are some great experiments. But anytime you're getting feeling like there's if you're a guitarist, which if is probably true of most of the musicians who are watching this broadcast, Guitar is a very common instrument, and guitar with standard tuning is a very common way to play the guitar. And standard tuning on a guitar without a capo is the most standard, the most common thing that's ever been done on a guitar for the past, 250 years. So if you want to sound a little different, the first thing to do is play an instrument other than the guitar, or at least play in a tuning other than standard tuning, and and somewhere on the neck other than at the open, other than with no capo. And anything you do to change the tuning, to change the key you're playing in, is going to sound a little fresh. I mean, even though as ridiculously easy as it is to put a capo on the seventh fret, uh, way less than 5% of the music on with a guitar that's out there that's been recorded involves a capo on the seventh fret. So just doing it, as that simple little trick, will really make things sound fresh, more fresh. It's a very, very simple little trick, but yeah, it is worth experimenting with such things. And even if you play another instrument, you don't have to play it well at all. Just mess around with another instrument and just learn a few chords on it. It really, you really don't need to be good at it, but whatever you do with another instrument will help you come up with fresh ideas on the main instrument that you're playing. It's always that kind of diversity is always good. That kind of variety. Getting out of the house, traveling in your mind, traveling in the real world, meeting other people in any context. All that is very good for your coming up with good writing ideas. And I'm just going to keep on talking until other people have any other questions. But you see how much mileage I got out of that one question. So you just, if we can have a few more questions like that, and that'd be very helpful. I hope it was useful for other people, the answer to that question, if you can call that what that was. But I talk about this every time I ever talk about songwriting in any context. But the first rule, I would say, of songwriting, if you're especially doing topical songwriting or political, as they say, or if you're writing about history or current events, really, it also applies to just writing about your own personal life, or just about whatever happened in your life yesterday, or about your love life, or telling a story about how you met your partner, whatever, anything, any kind of whatever you're writing about, basically. But perhaps especially for topical political type of stuff, it's so much more powerful generally if you tell a story. Telling a story is really what you want to do. And if you listen to a lot of the songs that you may love because you think they are really speaking to you in some kind of anthemic way, or they're making a point you really agree with, you might find often when you look at it that actually what you really like about that song in the first place is that it's telling a story that you identify with. But there's also exceptions, of course. There's lots of great songs that don't tell stories, and there's lots of great anthemic songs that just make some kind of a political point without telling a story. Loads of them. But the best songs that you'll tend to remember the most, that will have the most impact on other people, that can actually that can really change minds and bring people to a place that they've never been, is a good, well-told story. And to tell a story well, you do not tell people what you think, and you do not tell people what you feel. Um, it may be cathartic or therapeutic for you to tell us what you think and what you feel, but and there's a lot of contexts where that might be helpful or a good thing to do. But when it comes to writing songs, it's not helpful, because if you want people to feel something or think about something, then you have to tell a story that will lead them to create their own conclusions, their own thoughts, their own feelings, and then you can transport somebody in a really powerful way, because then you're leading them to reaching their own emotional or intellectual conclusions, and that's the power of good storytelling. Of course, to write a good song that tells a good story, it's also necessary that the music be fresh and interesting and not boring or repetitive in a bad way. Repetitive can be great if you mean it to be repetitive, but not if it's repetitive in a bad way. And the rhymes have to be perfect, and the meter has to be really good and easy and sound natural. I mean, these things are really vitally important, or else you break the spell and it doesn't work. That's really important. But I want to get to some of these comments, questions. There was a question about my favorite folk singer. I reject the term folk music because it's been so terribly misused. Pete Seeger also rejected the term folk music in his later years. But I think what you mean is songwriters, perhaps. I don't know what you mean. But if you mean folk singer, then tell me what a folk singer is. And then I'll tell you what my favorite folk singers are once I know what that is. But if by folk singer you mean people who play acoustic music, or people who are good songwriters, which is often what people mean by that term, then I would say a couple of the folks that I'll hopefully be interviewing soon are some of my favorite songwriters on the planet, and they both, some of my favorite songwriters are actually still alive, very much still alive and with us. And one of them is Jim Page in Seattle. Another is Rob Johnson, who used to be from the London area and now lives around Brighton. And yeah, the Freso is saying, I embrace folk music, which seems a lot narrower than the English folk music. Well, yeah, I don't know, narrow, broad. I mean, it's complicated because what happened with the term folk music is back in the 50s and 60s with the folk music revival. The term folk music became something that meant basically like a white middle class person from the suburbs singing music that comes from a different tradition than the one that person is actually coming from. It's just, I mean, it's hard to say exactly what it means, but it had to, the term folk music became something that had to do with white people with guitars, which has nothing to do with the term folk music, which is a much broader concept in any language than white people with guitars. That can't be. If that's what folk music means, then obviously it's being misused. So then people like Pete Seeger and later my younger people like myself rejected the term because it's irrelevant. But yeah, if we're using the term folk music to talk about traditional music, then it's a relevant term. Then it makes sense. But then in order to deal with that problem in the very broadly defined folk music community, in places like the U.S. and Britain and Ireland, we use the term traditional music or trad music, and by which we mean the music that comes out of the musical traditions of that region, and that's a very legitimate term. But folk became a one of those terms that just got too broad to be useful. Not that it was bad to use in the first place. It just got too world music. That's a horrible term too. I agree. Yeah, because what does it mean? Like, it's like music from everywhere in the world other than the West. Like, but what the heck? Who came up with this idea? I mean, yeah, okay, they might not have been playing enough African music on BBC. I completely agree, but we didn't need to invent the term world music in order to get African music played on the radio. You can just play it. Call it something else. Call it what it is. Which is a bit more specific. There was also the question, who are my favorite pop singers? And that's a very interesting question, because I don't really have any favorite pop singers, but I think it's the whole phenomenon is fascinating. I'm just looking at other questions, which luckily I've been getting, which is wonderful. Fred Wilkinson, do you put a lot of effort into research for your songwriting? That's a great question. Because it's a very relevant question when we're talking about this type of songwriting, which is good because, relevant questions are nice for relevant discussions. Gosh, where am I going with that? Probably need to smoke more of this. But the research is really important, and luckily, depending on what you're writing about, you may or may not need to do a lot of research. Like if you're writing about something that just happened down the street, and the people involved were people and that kind of thing, then there may not be much research involved. Or if you're writing about something that you are living, you live in a tent and you're writing about living in a tent, that's you don't probably need to do much research about what it's like to live in a tent. But if you don't live in a tent, you should certainly meet some people who do before you start writing any songs about living in tents. Um, but yeah, if you're not writing about something that's happening around you or something, and you can't do the research in a first person kind of way, like by meeting the people you're writing about, like say you're writing about a Welsh rebellion from 1831. Obviously, you can meet Welsh people. You might even meet a Welsh miner, but you're not going to meet one that was around in 1831. Um, so um, so research is really important, because if you're trying to write from another person's perspective, you need to know what it's like to be that other person as much as possible, which of course without being that person you can't, but you can get as close as possible to really understanding what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes, which we humans are surprisingly capable of doing. No matter who you are, what your background is, if you try hard enough, you do enough research, and you really try in different ways to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, you can, and you can write about it. And the proof that you've done a good job, if you write about uh, something that it doesn't involve your own lived experience, is people who are from that place that you're writing about, or what that as close as possible. Like, I mean, obviously you're not going to be, nobody's from 1831, they're all dead, right? So you can't meet somebody from 1831 and say, well, did this song work, but at least you can write a song about a Welsh rebellion, and if working class people in Wales tear up when they hear the song, probably you're onto something, and if they roll their eyes or walk out of the room, you probably messed up. But yeah, research is very important, because as soon as you make anything up, you ruin whatever you've done. You ruin the impact. I mean, maybe you don't ruin it for everybody, because some people might not know that you made that up, but anybody who knows, you've ruined it. And then when people find out, you've ruined it. You have to, if you're writing about something that really happened, you have to stick to reality. um but it's not that hard to do. And if, I mean, in terms of like how much research you actually need to do, like you know you like if you're writing about something that just happened in the world and it's someplace you've never been, if you find a really well written newspaper article by somebody who was there and saw it, and you stick to only the details that are in the article, and you don't make anything else up, and you make sure that this journalist was doing the same thing. If you trust this journalist, that they were definitely not making anything up, then you can trust their description of what happened, and you stick very closely to that, which is not hard to do. uh, you know not just closely, but exactly. You don't even need to mention too many details, but just whatever details you need to mention in order to tell the story, make sure they're accurate. And yeah, that's very important. Uh, yeah, and then I'm just looking through some of these other um, questions, comments. The idea of traveling in your mind. Yeah, I have a song map on my that you can find on my website, which is yeah, do a certain kind of traveling on that, but it's not as good as real traveling, but you can do a lot of traveling in your mind. The mind is a very expansive place. Storytelling songs, let's see. Uh, yeah, then somebody code mentioned sometimes it's a very direct story, but then a lot of times songs tell a story in a less direct way. Yeah, absolutely. And um, like if you're trying to tell a story, if what you're trying to communicate is, let's say, a direct message, like um, 1 in 3 people in the United States are can't afford a $400 expenditure, or they would end up on the streets. They're like $400 away from living on the streets, basically, a paycheck away from the streets, as they often say. This is true of one in what is it, 1 in 3 Americans before the pandemic. But if you wanted to write a song about that, say, if that's the direct thing you wanted to communicate, which is an extremely valid thing to communicate, uh, you might have a real hard time writing a song that people can really connect with emotionally, that tells that story, because that story it is a story, but it's a very, very hard story to tell, because it's a story of tens of millions of people. It's possible to tell that story. I'm not saying it's not possible. It's definitely possible. But it's a lot more easy to tell the story of a one person or one community or one family in the context of this kind of financial and housing insecurity and desperation. Then there's all kinds of ways of inferring that the story you're telling about this one person or this one family or community is the story of tens of millions of other people. There's all kinds of ways to infer that, or even to include some piece of information along those lines at the end of the song or something in one line. You can do that. If you do it sneakily, you can do it without ruining the song. And you can even do it and where that can be a really important part of the song. One song that might accomplish that is a song I wrote called "Living on the Streets of LA," which you can find on my album "Strangers and Friends," which is on all the streaming platforms. But yeah, that is telling a story indirectly often is way more powerful than telling it directly. Looking more in here, questions, comments. And Liam McDonald, hey, Liam in Belfast, an essentially expendable worker in Belfast. And requests for songs to be covered by other artists. I mean, I get a lot of those requests, and which is always, I find, sort of, I mean, it's really flattering and wonderful, and I'm always way into other people singing my songs anytime and anywhere they want to do it, including if they want to change the lyrics. I mean, just go for it. It's all there for that purpose. The only thing that bothers me about getting requests for my songs to be covered by other artists is that other artists oftentimes don't realize that there is no need to make such a request. You do not need my permission to sing my songs. You do not need permission from any artist to sing their songs. And this is part of the international framework of copyright law. That if you write a song and you record it, or you've put sheet music out for it, or it's out there in the world in any form, in some recorded form, then it is available for anybody to sing. And then you can perform it anywhere you want. And if you perform somebody else's song or your own song in a venue in many countries, then that venue has to probably pay money to some artist rights or organization like GEMA in Germany, or ASCAP in the US, or whatever, CODA in Denmark. That venue is paying money into that artist rights organization, and that money theoretically is getting distributed to the songwriters in question. So if you're covering a song of mine, and you actually are keeping track and sending in the list of your set list that you did, and you're in the musicians union and whatever other endless number of other qualifications, theoretically the artist who actually wrote the song might get a few cents from the fact that you've performed that song in a venue. But it's nothing that you need to worry about. It's not your problem whether that happens or not. There's a legal structure set up here. It doesn't work, but that's not your problem. You don't need to ask any artist to cover their songs. And if an artist doesn't want you to cover the songs, you just tell them to fuck off and cover their song. If they've recorded it, it's there. It's in the public. It's like, I mean, that's yeah. It's if an artist doesn't want somebody else to cover their songs, they shouldn't record them, and they should just keep them privately in their bedrooms, and then they don't have to worry about other people recording them, because nobody will hear them. But if or other people performing them. If you want to record another artist's song, you also legally under the international copyright law framework, you do not need the permission of an artist to record their songs either. But with that, the legal, to whatever extent this is relevant, the legal thing is different. So then you're like, I would highly recommend not making like, if you're recording somebody else's song and you're putting it out on online or something, you got to be careful about how you're registering it. Make sure you're registering it as a song written by this other artist, but you register songs that you're covering with the artist rights agencies, and there's a structure for the artist. For every CD sold and every song streamed, they get point whatever of a cent, or it's all set up. This the whole thing. Like, if you're a hip hop artist and you're sampling other artists, and you don't need their permission either. That was controversial. It's no longer controversial. It's now just the legal framework is all set up, so you don't need to worry about those things. People who are not in the music business, maybe some who are too, are not aware of these things that I'm just telling you about, but it's true. So you don't need to worry about these things. Sing whatever songs you want, record whatever songs you want. If you're doing it professionally and putting out a CD, then just be careful how you're registering it, so you don't end up violating copyright law and owing some record company a lot of money. The only problem could come in if you're recording something and putting it out there on streaming platforms and it's not yours. That. But if you're performing it around and it's posting it on Facebook or YouTube, nothing to worry about. They'll just, you'll get a takedown notice if it's copyrighted material, or they'll just take it down if that. So yeah. So it can often be a problem as far as that goes. It's often a problem for me to sing my own songs, because I get takedown notices for using my own songs in the broadcast. Sometimes it's not a functional system, but it's nothing you need to worry about getting permission. So moving on to more questions. So nice to have questions. By story, you mean intro, body, and conclusion. Sounds very scientific, the approach to songwriting, Marvin says. I don't know if it's scientific. I mean, maybe it's scientific. It is scientific, really. It is scientific. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily use the term, but yeah, it's objective. There is this very American idea that everything is beautiful and subjective and original and unique and individual, and that if you create songs, other people might not relate to them, but they're brilliant because they're your individual original creation, and that's automatically therefore brilliant. But that's just a bunch of bullshit. And like I said before, a sad song should make people cry. A funny song should make people laugh. If a sad song doesn't make people cry, it's not a sad song. You may have wanted it to be a sad song, but it's only a sad song if it has that impact on people. So yeah, that's scientific. Like, if you make a vaccine for a virus, it has to work. Only then is it a vaccine. You can call it a vaccine, but it's only a vaccine if it actually works, right? So that's I don't know what would make me think of that particular analogy, but but intro, body, and conclusion, no, definitely not. A story doesn't need to be necessarily following that pattern. But I mean, telling a story, when I say tell a story, I mean, it could mean different things. It could just mean describing a situation. It could mean different things. But what I mean is, you're not telling people what you think, and you're not telling people what you feel. You're not announcing opinions. That's what I mean more than anything when I say tell a story. Don't tell us your opinions and your feelings. Just describe something. Give us some imagery. And if it's a story with a beginning, middle, and end, that's great. And the end, but if it's an end, just make it an end. Don't make it a conclusion in the sense of wrapping up all the loose ends. Don't try to conclude in the sense of making a point, because once you make a conclusion, then you're telling us what you think and what you feel. We don't want to know about that. We want to draw those conclusions ourselves. So don't conclude the song for us in that sense. If you mean conclusion by wrapping it up, don't do that. But beginning, middle, end, yeah, that can be okay. And do you know about the hope punk movement / genre? I find most of your music to fit square into this. No, I've never heard of hope punk. Never. I've heard of folk punk, and I like using the term folk punk, even though I don't particularly like the term folk, but folk punk seems more descriptive, so I like that. And David, because two words is better than one sometimes, like libertarian socialist. David Heap says, Woody Guthrie, all music is folk music. I ain't never heard no horse sing a song. Yeah, that's good. I mean, horses, yeah, they're not known to be very melodic, although they make nice noises. Yeah, but he's definitely going by the much broader definition of folk music, which is very appropriate, because it wasn't the so-called folk singers like Woody Guthrie, who was a folk singer in the sense that he sang folk songs, but he also was a songwriter, and none of these songwriters, invented the term folk singer. It's the industry has to call you different things, They have to put everything in a box, and it's very understandable that you got to put things in boxes, because that's what language does. But the boxes they put things in don't very often work very well, and they're often really actually problematic. And in the terms of the history of the music industry, and currently and in the past century, the boxes that they tend to put musicians in are intentionally divisive and racist in their basic design. So they are best avoided. And if you want to read more about that, I highly recommend Matt Callahan's latest book about the history of the music industry in San Francisco from 1965 to 75. What was it called? But anyway, look up Matt Callahan, M-A-T Callahan, if you want to read more on the music industry and its racism. And then I'm just going on with these wonderful questions, and we will go longer than an hour if because I want to answer all these questions. But the idea is an hour generally, and I'm glad people are asking questions. Hi, David from Gina. Does your family play instruments too? And do you sometimes sing and play music together? Yeah, we have there's in the house there's ukuleles and a half-size guitar and a little a full-size electric keyboard, but it's on a table that's only about 1.5 feet high, so the baby can prop herself up and reach the keyboard, and the toddler easily can, and they both play the keyboard a lot, and the half-size guitar in their own way. Like the toddler is turning 4 tomorrow, so he's gonna, I think, start really playing the guitar sometime soon. But so far, it's more just like musical experimentation, and which I think is really important for little kids to do. And I think music lessons can really kill the music in a child, and it's something to be very careful about. But having instruments around and playing music with your children is really good, and I do that a lot. Not as often as I intend to, because I'm often doing other things like writing or whatever. But yeah, I do play music with the kids, and they love it, and it's a wonderful way to spend time, and they just get so happy if I'm just playing music. So it's like, with the toddler and the baby, they can often kind of be not getting along so well with each other sometimes. But if I'm playing music, the baby's dancing and the toddler's singing along, and yeah, they love it. Have I considered writing a song about the Zapatistas? I did. I have written songs about the Zapatistas, and other songs that mention them, and other songs that are all about the Zapatistas. And I need to write better ones, because the ones I've written about the Zapatistas generally date back to the Zapatista uprising on January 1st, 1994. And that was a long time ago, and I wasn't writing all that much great material back then. So It's but the Zapatista National Liberation Army really very very much represents my political orientation in a nutshell. And I think they're wonderful, and I think that their basic strategies in terms of community building need to be emulated globally. Tom Fowler, I recommend writing songs about Welsh rebellions from 1831. Yeah, well, I did that already, so maybe I'll write another one. It's called Cheese and Bread, and you probably know that. Yeah, Gina likes the research that I'm doing, and thank you. I think you can really, by researching these things and writing songs about it, you can often be the first person who's ever written a song about what seem to be really major events. Although it's probably not true that it's just the first person I know of. But Howard Zinn, when he wrote A People's History of the United States, he had never heard of the Ludlow Massacre of 1913. Which, if you want to read more about that, read an amazing book published in English recently by PM Press about the Italian anarchist Luigi Galliani. But there was basically a war in 1913 in Colorado between Union miners and gun thugs, and the Union miners lost, and 70 people were killed. But nobody knew about it. I mean, it didn't even make into history books. Howard Zinn had never even heard about it, until he heard the song by Woody Guthrie. So I'm just saying, it's good. You write songs, it might work. People might remember about it later. Yeah, Gina says, talking about Skid Row in LA. Yeah, all over LA, all over the West Coast, how people live is atrocious. The tents, which I've written about fairly extensively. Oh, and somebody was wondering about my song map, and there's a link. Yeah, it's a Google song map. If you go to davidrovics.com, one of the tabs is song map. Billy says that the hostility around sort of imitation or like just tracing drawings or I mean the whole question is really rife, and it's a very big complex question, because the question of like artists making a living, musicians, photographers, everybody else surviving, it's a very open-ended question. I mean, obviously the tech companies, the platforms that are using our work and are making billions, but the work they're using from the artists oftentimes is just being taken or used for free, and you'll get good exposure, and as they say, you could die of exposure. It's it's a very complex thing, this whole phenomena. But I don't think the answer is everybody suing each other and getting all into copyright law. I mean, there's ways to structure a society so artists can survive, but the art that's out there, it's for everybody. And that may be a controversial opinion on my part, but I think we can do better than just being all selfish and suing each other and getting angry when somebody sings somebody's song or copies their photograph or whatever. Come on. Yeah, but I hear you. If you've you've run into that kind of thing, I think that's very common. But it's also complicated, and it's also important to understand that the artists who get upset about this stuff also have a point. Um, I just don't share their point. Let's see. Yeah, comments on more collaboration going on out there, which is really great. Hyper pop artists yeah, there's a streams that they're doing a lot more streaming. Yeah, there's a lot more streaming going on. And yeah. And Fresso says it exactly how YouTube's and similar copyright infringement detection systems work are not the problem, but rather the problem being the underlying legal framework that makes them necessary. Yeah, I agree. Although, I mean, I don't think it all should just be given away so that YouTube keeps all the money. But I also agree that just doing these takedown notices is not at all the way it should be structured. It's a bad structure. Matt Callahan, Freso asks, yeah, M-A-T with one T, Matt Callahan, but otherwise you spelled his name correctly, and look at on PM Press for that book. What do I think of the current situation in Poland and Hungary? Well, that's a very complex question, but you're talking about the authoritarian governments there? Yeah. Oh, I could say a lot about that, but I'll stick to the subject of songwriting for this session and keep on going. And yeah, no, The Trouble with Music by Matt Callahan is his previous book, which is also a wonderful book, but the book that he wrote on PM Press is another one about San Francisco. You'll find it. I should be, if I had an assistant, I'd be sending out links and stuff. But, well, I've been talking at you for an hour, and your ears might be falling off by now, but I hope that you've gotten something out of this little lecture on songwriting, and I will be hopefully seeing you on the same platform, whatever platform you're watching on. I'll see you sometime soon when I'm interviewing various friends. And then a week from today on Monday, I'll do another one of these solo sessions, and I'll talk about surviving as a musician or an artist in the modern era, which seems like a question that's of interest to many people. So if you know anybody that's interested in that subject, tell them to tune in on a week from today, and tune in around 10 a.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. GMT on other random days, and you'll hear me interviewing people, and it'll all be archived as well on YouTube and such. And what was that? Replay? I'll be very surprised if he does. I'm not sure what that's a reference to, but yes, you can replay this when I'm done. It will be all archived on various platforms, including YouTube, like for a very long term, and other platforms for a couple of weeks, the way they work. Thank you all for listening, and hope you survive okay in whatever your circumstances are. And if you're an American waiting for your check to come, I hope it comes soon. Mine has not, but I hear some people are getting their checks, their bank transfers, and feeding themselves, which is good. And keep on keeping on. Don't pay the rent, and keep in touch. And let's see, what else should I say? I'm available to perform on your Facebook page. If you want to support what I'm doing, go to davidrovics.com/subscribe, patreon.com/davidrovics. There's exclusive material for you, but basically I do all this for free, mostly. And I'll keep that up, and I'll see you on the front lines, whether they're online or at the nearest anti-eviction protest near you. Yeah. Have a good one. Bye.